Thank you, Rich. No teacher enjoys teaching the period right after lunch, but hopefully I have a fully caffeinated audience, unlike with my students usually. Rich has asked me to talk about teaching our children how to pray, and tasked with maybe trying to concretize as much as possible what we've heard already and give some maybe actionable steps that we can go home with today was my task. So I'll try to do that as best as I can. When we think about how to do something, we want to think about what we're doing, what the goal is, and also why. So I'll also try to sprinkle those in throughout in terms of prayer. And I will begin with a moment from Scripture. This is from the Gospel of Mark, this particular one. And it goes, "When he was at Bethany, reclining at table in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of perfumed oil. She broke the alabaster jar and poured it on his head." And skipping a few lines ahead, Jesus said, "She has done a beautiful thing for me." Now, this moment is not typically associated with prayer, and it's maybe seemingly insignificant little moment, but it deserves attention not only because it appears in all four Gospels, but also it's not until the Gospel of John that we find out that this woman is the Mary, sister of Martha and Lazarus, whom Jesus is so close to, the same Mary who Andy referenced, being the one who was kind of sitting and kneeling at Jesus' feet when he was at table. And the gospel says, or Jesus says, that she has chosen the better part. She is the one who has found the one thing needful. One thing needful. So when we think about religion, when we think about faith, I often try to remind my juniors that faith is not a question of what, but rather of who. As Alva mentioned, we're talking about relationship. And more specifically, we're talking about an intimate relationship. We're talking about intimacy. That's what we're after. That's what we're after in our prayer. And this Mary really, she hit a home run on the intimacy part, right? She nailed it. What did she do? What can we emulate in her actions that can get us closer to that intimacy? St. Teresa says, and this is the first definition in the Catechism. Part 4, by the way, of the Catechism is an underrated and beautiful section of the Catechism. It's all on prayer. And it defines prayer out of the words of St. Thérèse of Lisieux as a surge of the heart, a simple look towards heaven. And if what we're doing is trying to reconnect as best as we can with our Maker after the fall and the sin that plagues us, then our prayer is part of how we are bridging that gap. I've heard it said that heaven is basically one long prayer, like we're all just praying together. And so when we pray here on earth, we're doing nothing other than prepping for heaven. We're getting ourselves acclimated to what heaven is going to be like. So the layout of this talk is going to be a few different things. First, I'm a little bit intimidated to give this talk because when you're talking about prayer, it's such an immense, mysterious topic. We could go on for days and days. I think it's also difficult because we can get lost in the weeds or in the clouds. We can get too overly specific or just stay in the vague. So I'm going to try to shoot the gap. It's also intimidating because if you look at the saints and read the saints, they're very hesitant to give any specific program. They don't lay out a really specific formula for prayer. And the reason for this, as we can surmise, is that prayer is just so personal. Because it's a relationship, we can talk about some principles, but we wouldn't want to give a step-by-step process. So I will not be trying to do that today at all. E.E. Cummings said that the most important prayer is that I be I. May I be I. And it's not a call towards relativism, but it's a call that we find that true person that God has created and meant for us. Not that I am going to determine who I will be, but that I find and I allow myself to be open to that unfolding of who God has made me to be. And prayer is one of the ways that we do that. So I hope to lay down some of those, some principles. The structure of it will be 10 concrete suggestions, ideas, not a checklist, not an exhaustive list of things that we should try to do, but maybe just one or two that you pick out and say, okay, maybe that's an interesting idea. Certainly not trying to answer a lot of these questions, like what is prayer or what isn't prayer. Maybe just touch on some of these things, obstacles to prayer, some things to avoid, and then finally some necessary environmental factors. And in preparing for this, I actually polled my juniors. I teach 65 juniors, and I asked them, guys, I'm giving this talk and I need your help. I want to hear from you guys. What has helped you, if you consider yourself to be a prayer in any way, what has helped you? And it was really fascinating. And we had a really good long discussion in both of my sections. So some of these things will be fruits of that conversation, and so I'll just leave that with you. So here are the ideas, and some of these, as you will be able to tell, some will be better with certain ages, some with others. All right, number one is the idea that we can develop a family plan for daily prayers with our children. We'll start with kind of the most obvious. Most of us, I think all of us in this room will have a family budget. And that budget is not so much a constrictive structure that keeps us from having financial freedom, but it's actually something that safeguards our financial freedom or hopeful financial freedom. And a prayer plan, a family plan for that, for our own daily lives, can do the same thing. Not that it has to be the exact same every day, but just, and it doesn't even need to be super formalized, but just, one of the boys said, one of the things that was most meaningful for me was I could just count on every single night, either my mom or my dad, or sometimes both, doing nighttime prayers with me at bedtime. And it was just the consistency of it was really impactful. Whether it's bedtime, whether it's the morning car ride into school, talk about it with your spouse and see, just kind of what works for your family. If we think about the three different types of prayer that the Catechism gives us: liturgical, vocal, and mental. Liturgical being that we celebrate together in the Mass. Vocal being the memorized prayers that we can say aloud or quietly. And then the mental prayer is sort of that intimate conversation. And a lot of this will be focused on the mental prayer, but I don't want us to underestimate vocal prayer either. There was a moment when late in St. Josemaria's life where someone got close to him after Mass and he was saying his Thanksgiving and he was praying. You could see he was really enwrapped in his prayer, and the guy kind of was ambitious and kind of kept inching closer to kind of hear what he was saying because he was kind of praying out loud. And he thought there was going to be these great, marvels. And it turns out he was just reciting some of his childhood prayers that he had memorized as a child that his mom had taught him. We don't want to underestimate these. Thomas Merton, who Bishop Barron calls the modern master of prayer, when he was asked what's the most important thing, the number one most important thing for prayer, and his simple answer was make the time. So when we think about, doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be a lot, but the consistency and trying to make the time for it. Number two, we can introduce our children to mental prayer. Even at a young age, we can introduce them to mental prayer. Two concrete ideas here when thinking about mental prayer. One, we could experiment with doing our own mental prayer aloud in front of them. I've gotten to the point where I actually cut my children's hair now, and you can pass okay. When I started doing it when they were 2 or 3, and then they looked terrible. But, they didn't care because they were 2 or 3, and who cares about their hair when they're 2 or 3? And then you develop it over time, right? Well, that's kind of a good opportunity, and I'm not going to care what I sound like praying aloud in front of my kid because they're very young. Maybe not the right thing to do with teenagers, but with the younger children on the way into school, a couple minutes, you don't want to make it to the point where they're, pulling their hair out. But it's a great way for them to hear, okay, you're concerned about other people. You're thankful for the things in your life. You're bringing them into the things that are on your heart. And if we can be honest in that moment and not make it be super worried about making this sound like the perfect prayer, but rather, an honest opening of your heart, that could be a good thing. The second is within that plan that I referenced in number 1, usually those are going to be vocal prayers, right? You're praying your guardian angel prayer at night, your St. Michael prayer, or maybe it's a couple of Hail Marys on the way into school. Try to find a spot once in that plan where you give a moment of silence for your sons. Maybe 30 seconds is all. Maybe it's at the end of the nighttime prayers. Okay, let's take 30 seconds, guys, and just talk to Jesus in our hearts. And again, you don't want it to be long because you don't want it to be cumbersome for them. But even in that short moment, that silence that Andy's talking about hits home and allows them to really encounter, at least in a certain way. It'll be uncomfortable at first. It'll be very strange at first, maybe even for us. But then allow them that time and space. And you don't coach it or guide it or tell them what to say or anything. Just give them that space. That silence is super important, as we know. Number 3, we can pray the Psalms with our children. And I just realized that I left the book that I was going to quote from this, but it's Pope Benedict, when he's got a whole collection of addresses on prayer. And he says that the book of Psalms is the book of prayer par excellence. And he describes why they're so effective. Because the Psalms are out of the mouth of God. And so when we are praying them aloud, when we're reading them aloud with our kids, we are showing them, we're modeling forth how to pray. We're coaching, that is the coaching for their mental prayer. When we teach the boys in the valley how to draw, we show them the works of the masters. When we teach them how to sing, we play for them great songs. For prayer, it's difficult sometimes because they don't get to hear masters' prayers, but the Psalms are those. It's also nice to be able to pray what we know Jesus and Mary prayed in their times of prayer, right? So the Psalms are a wonderful, wonderful gold mine. There's another reason why I think Psalms can be so effective, and that is because they get at sincerity, the sincerity of our prayer. I think there's a false notion sometimes that all of us can adopt, that prayer needs to be polite. We need to address God with manners. And when you read the Psalms, you recognize that a lot of the Psalms are David or someone else screaming at God, railing against him, complaining. Why do you cast me off, Lord? Why do you forsake me? Bishop Barron tells a story of a woman who has been tending to her husband who's dying of a long-time terminal illness at a Catholic hospital. And she walks out one night, and there's a statue of the Blessed Mary, and she starts picking up rocks and throwing it at the statue, rocks and dirt. And the security guard comes out and starts to stop her, and a nun, an old wise nun, comes and says, "Don't stop her, she's praying." And I'd love to see the look on the face of that security guard. But a wise comment from the nun. We don't think of prayer like that. But God doesn't want us to cover over those real feelings that we have in our heart. And if it's screaming, it needs to be screaming. If it's crying, it needs to be crying. If it's rejoicing, it needs to be rejoicing. And the Psalms bring together all those emotions in a beautiful way. Alvaro talked about the sentimentalism that we have to stay away from in our faith. Right? That it's not about how I feel. It's not about, showing up to Mass or saying a prayer and get what I feel out of it. And often we tend to do that with prayer, right? We show up cold, and what we want is to leave warm. And the Psalms train us that actually it should be the other way around. I want you to go in hot. I want you to be emotional. I want you to bring all those true passions, which I gave you, by the way, and I want you to bring them to me, to the prayer, to the altar. And let's make sense of them. Let's not bury them. And let's not let them erupt in your life in some unhealthy way. But let me help you process those in a healthy way. So I think that is an important thing. There's a book that I would recommend that has a terrible title but great content. It's called I Believe in Love. And whenever I mention this to my juniors, they're like, eyes roll. But the priest here, the book it's on a retreat. It's a retreat based on the teachings of Saint Therese. And this priest in here says that we have to be people of desire. The saints were people of desire. And so when we reject sentimentalism, yes, we can't go to the opposite extreme and overcorrect into a completely intellectual approach to our faith or our prayer either. We want to bring those desires. We want our sons to really look at the saints and say, wow, I want to be like that. I want to desire that. And the priest here who gives the sermon says, to desire to love is already to love. And sometimes we don't feel it, but we want to feel it and ask God, can you feel it? Give me those feelings is a good thing. They might not feel these strong feelings that they read about in the Psalms right now, but they will. They're going to have suffering. They're going to have difficult things. They're going to have things that they really want to rejoice over. And the Psalms train them. It's an incredible emotional education in how to handle those moments that are coming down the road for them. Number 4, we can provide opportunities and options. Andy's talked about the importance of freedom in the practice of their faith. It's one of the environmental factors that is a sine qua non. We can't force our children to pray. We want them to pray very badly, but we can't force them. And the freedom is something that is hugely important for that. But freedom is worthless without opportunity. Right? If we don't give them the opportunity to pray, right? I mean, what's good if say, hey, help yourself to anything in the fridge. I haven't been grocery shopping in 3 months, but help yourself. I mean, if we do this with our kids with prayer, we want to show them what are some opportunities. And I think this takes the form of gentle offerings. Hey, I'm going to confession this afternoon. You want to come with me? Or, there's adoration, there's a holy hour coming up. Giving them the option, but also present to them the opportunities. And then also options in the sense that they have choices to make, right? With your young children at nighttime or on the car ride in, hey, would you like to choose a prayer to lead us in, right? What's your favorite one? Or, after Mass, one of my little guys, I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and my 8-year-old likes to kind of just go around the church praying at the different statues. Would you like to pray? Would you like to pray your Thanksgiving with me here? Or you can, go back and talk to the priest, or you can go up and pray at the statues. Those options seem like not very important, but what it does is it gives them an agency in their prayer. So they're the ones actually selecting and choosing to do it. The 5th grade, we take to a chapel period, and say you can do the stations, you can go for a prayer walk, just one of you. You can't go with a buddy, but you can choose a buddy to go outside and pray a rosary with if you want, at the statue of Our Lady, or give them options. And then whatever they do, even if they don't do it as perfectly as if they were right next to you, they've got their will in it, and they're choosing it, and that's very big. Thomas Merton, again, in his book, Seven-Story Mountain, which is his autobiography, he explains the moment of, or at least the beginning moment of his conversion. It happened when he was 17, and he was traveling after high school on his own because he had a very sort of roller coaster family situation, but he was traveling on his own in Rome. He was a complete atheist at this point. And he explains his time of just kind of bouncing around from church to church. And he talks about just he would go in the Forum and he'd go to the Pantheon, but then it was the churches that he was choosing to go into. And at first it was just for their cultural significance, but then he started to recognize certain things about this. And it made such an impact on him that was, he pinpoints, the moment of his conversion. And I bet that would not have happened. He doesn't say this, but I bet it wouldn't have happened if he had gone around all those churches on a tour, or if his family was the one taking him around to all those churches necessarily. I don't know, but that's my thought. Number 5 is we can ask our children to pray for us. I think this is just a great way to naturally work it into the day. We shouldn't push our children to pray, but we can ask them to pray for us. Big or small things. Hey, Dad's got a meeting that's, kind of a big one today. Can you guys say a prayer for me? I'm giving this talk today. Can you guys pray for me? And that comes across as a little bit different to them. It's not so much us pushing them, but it's us showing them. We might have a hesitation, like it makes me seem unconfident, or I'm nervous about this thing, and so that's my hesitation. But really what will come across to our children is our confidence in God, that we really believe in the power of prayer. This is important to me, right? And then we can also ask them, anything that I can pray for you today. One thing that children often say, one thing that adults will say, one thing that we probably all struggle with is, why am I praying if my prayers don't always get answered? Or maybe that my prayers never get answered. And, there is an intellectual answer to that you can read in lots of books. And to Alvaro's point, it's reasonable. But for children, sometimes the reason is not enough. And like Andy was mentioning, the example is what's going to get them over the edge. They need to see from us that, sometimes I don't understand either, but I believe. I know, and I rest on this, and I run on prayer, and I need you guys. We try to, it's hard to get our kids to feel needed by, we give them chores because we feel like it's good for them. But really back in the day, kids had to do chores because they were needed for the family. And I bet they did them more willingly because they had a sense of being needed and doing things that was actually contributing to the family. Well, they feel like, I'm not just praying to be a good boy. I'm not just praying because Daddy wants me to. I'm praying, Dad needs me to pray for him. Mom needs me to pray for him. Then we've given them a power, which I think can be very valuable. Number 6, we can tell them stories. We know how, stories and storytelling has been a buzz even in the professional world and the business world for a long time now. In the spiritual world, in the terms of teaching them to pray, I also think it's very valuable in 2 ways. One, our children need inspiration. They need to be inspired. And so they need to, and this was actually one of the points of one of my juniors, it really helps me when I read about the saints and I see them doing these great things, and also that they're kind of like normal. There's a human element to them. I mean, obviously the young kids love hearing about the crazy miracles and the saints flying and that kind of thing. The teenagers, they like hearing about how they're just like them in ways, right? Carlo Acutis, who's going to be canonized soon. My son is over studying in Rome, and he went and saw him. He's preserved, I guess. And he said, Dad, he's wearing Nikes. They love the idea that there are these people who have gotten so close with God and done really incredible things, and giving them the sense that maybe I can do that too. Story is a great way by telling them these saint stories, reading them saint stories. Secondly, maybe even more importantly, is tapping into their imagination. We cannot pray well without using our imagination because we're not hearing anything sensibly. We're not seeing God. Most of us, we're not hearing God use words. And so we need to use our imagination in the right way. And hearing these stories, Old Testament stories or stories of St. Paul, is a great way to, tap into that prayer imagination. It also opens them up to the, practice down the road of Lectio Divina, using scriptures, using Old and New Testament as a guide for their prayer, right? I know somebody gave me the image one time of when they pray, they imagine God just up there in the tabernacle, and they're kind of welcoming you into his living room, and he's sitting down and here, have a drink, let's talk, and every once in a while maybe there's a lull in the conversation. Here, let me show you something. Read this real quick, right? Taking a book with us to our prayer and having that be a guide for us can be a great way to have our children move along the path of prayer. Number 7, we can gift them a prayer journal. This one's going to be brief because it's pretty much the extent of the point. Some people are readers, some people are writers. I can tell you that as a teacher, we know that there are just different strengths academically, and we all know ourselves to have different strengths. And for some, the reading might be a real key for the prayer to stir things up. Sometimes it might be writing. One of the juniors who I polled, he came in afterwards. He didn't want to share this in front of the group, and he came over and he goes, I remember the first time I started really praying for real was when I made up my own prayer and wrote it down. And I actually memorized it, and now I say that prayer when I get up and, I have a game that I'm going to play. I say that prayer real quick, so it can tap into something that, as we know, sometimes we'll write something and look back and you almost weren't even consciously thinking about it, but it came out somehow. And to give voice to that, I think, can be very important for some children. Number 8, we can talk about prayer. Again, we don't want to overdo it. We don't want to make it so that it's, the majority of our conversations. But one of the boys afterwards, after we had this conversation, one of the juniors came up and he says, "Sir, you know what you have to do with these parents? You just have to do exactly what you just did with us." And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, in 20 minutes, have learned more about prayer than I have my entire life. And I said, what? Unpack. What do you mean? He will listen. I was just going around the room listening to all these guys give their thoughts, and almost all of them were like brand new for me. And this is a guy that you would see in Mass, goes and makes visits. So he's not someone who's just kind of new to the faith. And the whole time I'm listening, and I'm thinking about I'm trying to think up my own ways of and I just, it spoke to me of, the need for discussion. I mean, how often do we ask our kids, you don't want to get personal and dig, hey, what were you saying to God? But what do you guys do when you pray? I mean, what's the best way that works for you? And just kind of get them to own it, because then it moves it out of the realm of teaching, right? Didactic teaching, like this is how you do it, in which case they'll be defensive, maybe even check out, to the point where you're putting them in the driver's seat and their wheels are turning. And that gets some really good stuff out of it. Number 9, we can sow prayer into our ordinary daily activities. One obstacle I think that can exist in our children's minds when it comes to prayer is the idea that it's just too much. It's too long. It takes so much effort. Rosary's long. A holy hour? or an adoration. I mean, get out of here. If we can find ways, and I think this works equally well with toddlers as it does with teenagers, to just find ways to work it into our normal activities that we go about. I mean, and we think about the way that we converse with our children, it's not always these, come into my den, son, and have a long conversation. Every once in a while, that has to happen. But usually it's, hey, how you doing? Hey, I love you. Hey, that was awesome. Hey, what you think about? What's on your mind? It's those kinds of things. And if we can we splice those into our day, right? And some of us might already have some things. An ambulance goes by. Hey, let's say a quick prayer for that person. Or, you pass a church. Hey, Jesus, just something that gets that gets it into their normal day, working into their jobs. We were moving. We got some firewood the other day, and I was having my 6-year-old and 8-year-old help me bring the logs back to the place where we were going to stack them. And they started to complain, and I said, all right, guys, well, every time you take a log, imagine it being someone that you love, and you're going to pray for that person, right? It can be Mommy, it can be Georgia, and they started getting amped up about it and started doing it. And then they started making a joke about it, like, oh, this big fat one's you, Dad, that. Thought that was hilarious. And they were running back, like, this one's Mom, and this one's Georgia. I don't know why my neighbors don't hang out with us, but if we can make it normal for them, somehow they're doing something already, can we inject into what they're doing prayer? Right? St. Paul tells us, pray unceasingly. Well, that's impossible. We can't be in the chapel unceasingly. We can't be consciously zeroed in on God unceasingly. But we can sow into our day. Little moments, little aspirations. Number 10, and finally, we can create a space in our home for prayer. Yes, we want to splice it into our normal daily activities, but it's also good, as much as we can, to teach our kids that as much as possible, once a day, we want to have a time, just me and God. For enough time that allows me to get that interior silence that Andy's talking about, and to have that connection. Somebody asked St. Josemaria in a get-together, they said, St. Josemaria, this was back in the 1960s in Spain when you were a weirdo, when you didn't smoke. St. Josemaria, when I smoke, can I pray? And St. Josemaria says, yeah, you can pray when you smoke, just don't smoke when you pray. In other words, when you're doing the things out and about in your life, pray always. Inject prayer in all those. But there needs to be some time that's separated from all other activity, from all other people. Solitude, silence, space. Doesn't mean we need to make a shrine in our house or even a little mini chapel, but just a place. Might be a place where they see you go for your prayer. Right? You're there when they wake up, you're already in that spot. And maybe you've got a candle or a little tiny statue or a little tiny cross. They know that's your prayer spot. And it doesn't have to be just Mom and Dad's prayer spot, right? It could be a place that they could potentially, as they get older, are attracted to going to doing their reading of the gospel or their prayer by themselves. And that's where, a couple of these factors come together. Our example, this silence and this consistency. So I'll close, and like I said, this is not a program. This is just some ideas. These take one, take two, and see if it gets some wheels turning. Because it's such a big topic, such a big thing to think about. We want so badly for our children to pray, because we've found what it does to us. We've experienced the joy and the peace that praying brings to us, and that when we don't do it, how that goes away. And so we want it. I mean, is there anything we could want more for our children? And yet, we cannot manifest it. We cannot will it. It is not ours to just to push the button on. There's a story that there's a medieval painting of the presentation, I believe, the moment of the presentation, our Lord's presentation, where Mary and Joseph are bringing Jesus to the temple. And when the artist presented it to the commissioner of the painting, the commissioner looked at it and said, "Well, you made a mistake. There's no door handle on the temple." And the artist said, that's on purpose. Because the temple is representative of our hearts. And our hearts can only be opened from the inside. Prayer works like that. Prayer is something that there are some external factors. There are some techniques maybe that we can throw out. But really for us parents, when we're thinking about our children and them praying, we're clearing the ground. We're creating an environment. Freedom, opportunity, example. Those three. That's the recipe. Because, we're not concerned with, and we shouldn't, sometimes we can get into this trap, our children's prayer being pretty. In the end, we're not even concerned with our children being good. Right? Mary of Bethany's prayer was not pretty. I mean, think about the scene that must have been, right? We read it so often that we get used to hearing it and we glaze over it. But here she comes in. She breaks the jar, right, in the middle of this dinner and pours it on his head. And this is a crazy thing that happened. And we're just like, oh, yeah, the anointing at Bethany. But this is a crazy moment. And this is what we're looking for. We're hoping our children to break open the jars of their hearts, to open their hearts from the inside. And isn't it easy for our children and for all of us, for our hearts to become these crusted, callous, careless things, alabaster jars? But this stuff, what's inside, that's the beautiful stuff that Jesus is after. How do we live a life? How do we teach our children that's the point? That it's honest and real and intimate. And if we can have that honesty and humility and faith to live that prayer life on our own, then just like in the Gospel of John says, the home will be filled with the fragrance of it. And our kids will look at that and they'll smell it and they'll say, I want that. So thank you.